show. It is so exciting to be back, and today we have the honor of interviewing Dr. Ding, an infectious disease specialist, a doctor, cancer researcher. I mean, he's probably better to introduce himself, but I have been following Dr. Ding since, frankly, the pandemic, and he has been an amazing source of knowledge, and it is such an honor to be able to interview him. Quick note, the video is brought to you by HouseHack, open to non-accredited investors. Go check that out at househack.com, offering a 5% yield and upside in the stock. Read the disclosures. That said, let's jump into the interview. Welcome aboard, Dr. Ding. Thank you so much for being here. So I got to start. Biden, that debate with Trump was a disaster. It seems like even Democrats knew that this was a big problem for the Biden administration. What was your reaction to that debate?
Oh my God. I was actually watching that debate with a whole room full of Democratic colleagues, and these are like party insiders. We're talking about former DNC chairs as well. And literally everyone was face palming because it's one of those, the emperor's new clothes kind of things where like, I don't think I can say it out loud, but the expression, like the heads were on the table, pounding their foreheads on the table, that kind of bad kind of reaction. And so there's no sugarcoating it. It was as abysmal and horrible of a reaction as you can imagine.
Got it. So do you think, I mean, obviously now we've heard that he's been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which is terrible. I mean, it's metastasized to his bones, which, I'm guessing in even the most rare forms and aggressive forms would take at least a year, if not 2 or 3 years to spread. It seems like at the time of the debate, he was probably already a stage 2 or stage 3 cancer. And wouldn't somebody have known? Like, what's your take on this?
Yeah, the cancer thing is, again, completely separate of the cognitive issues where, you can debate whether or not there was a huge cover-up of the cognitive issues. And read Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's book. I don't want to get into that because, but for cancer, I know. I'm a cancer epidemiologist. I've gone through many NCI cancer programs. One of the things we know is there are certain cancers that we have screening for. We have mammography for breast cancer, colonoscopy for colon cancer, and we have PSA testing for prostate cancer. We don't have good tests for other cancers. We have, x-rays for lung cancer. But for most cancers, we actually don't have good tests for. But for these big 3, prostate, colon, and breast, we have decently good tests for it. And the fact that the latest news that Biden didn't have a PSA test since 2014, that's according to their spokesperson. This is like official spokesperson. That's unimaginable. Like some people are quoting me, well, men over 70 shouldn't get it. Well, it's not that men over 70, prostate cancer is a cancer that affects the elderly for the most part. It's not like you shouldn't test for it. It just, oftentimes people don't bother testing for it because they think, a lot of prostate cancer is mild. But I think people really need to put things into perspective. Like, for example, no one says pancreatic cancer is mild. No one says, breast cancer is mild. And, for the vast majority of people with breast cancer, they do survive. But we don't say like, it's just breast cancer, pish posh. Most of you won't die, and by the way, this attitude, I see it all the time in COVID as well. We'll get to that later, but, most of you are healthy, you won't die. This dismissiveness is insane. You have to look at the denominator because the denominator is breast cancer is the number 1 cancer in women. Prostate cancer is the number 1 cancer, in terms of like total incidence in men. And so even if you say most of them are mild, let's just go to just the severe or the more advanced ones, the regional and the metastasized ones. These 2 kind of cancers of prostate alone is way more than, say, cancers of pancreatic or brain cancer. And no one says, well, it's if you compare to that, how deadly prostate cancer is compared to in terms of advanced prostate cancer to these other cancers, we wouldn't really be dismissing it as like, it's rare. No, we would be testing it. And if we had tests for those tests, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, John McCain, for all these cancers that we didn't have early stage tests for, we would have probably saved their lives. But the fact that Biden, he's the president, he was the vice president, right? And the president, the fact that he has not had a PSA test in the last, 10, 11 years is just insane. And by the way, the guidelines that says you should not get it's not that you should not get, doctors should not offer a PSA test to someone over the age of 70 is because they think you're going to die anyways. And that's a stupid logic, first of all, because, let's just say American life expectancy is 75 to upper 70s. But, the issue is that's including all the other kinds of infant mortality, childhood mortality, and other mortality in your 70s. By the time you get to age 50 or 60, if you've already survived to age 50 or 60, you will have a very good chance of surviving way past 75. And so for them
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I've always been sort of depressed by that mortality number. It's like, oh man, you're done at 75 or whatever, game over. And what you're saying is because of all the other reasons people die, whether it's homicide or infant mortality or drug overdoses or whatever, that actually is like an anchor almost. That's what you're saying, right?
Pulling the average down. But if you do survive to 50 or 60, your chances of surviving to 80 are actually pretty good. And I think people just need to just completely wrap their heads around this. Oh, stop testing at 70. That's insane. And by the way, a lot of things, fine. If you want to argue that some diseases, once you have it, we don't have any treatment for, Alzheimer's, we don't really have a good treatment for that. A lot of diseases, we don't have treatments, even if you test positive, like John McCain's brain cancer was kind of basically inoperable. Like many brain cancers are like that. But we have treatments for this. If you detect it early, you could have surgery to remove it, or you can have radiation. There are interventions if you're early enough. Now, there's some people who's like, well, PSA testing is not very accurate, blah, blah, blah. It's not accurate as in if you have a very high number, basically there's something called sensitivity. Base sensitivity is a probability that you'll find the true disease, and specificity is the chance that you'll avoid false positives. And so it's a sliding scale. The higher your sensitivity to find true disease, the more false positives you have. But the lower, if you want to lower the sensitivity, you'll have, a lot of these false positive problems. And so I think at the end of the day, what we should do is there's something even better than just a one PSA test. And that is, you should test for PSA velocity. Epidemiologists always say you should always repeat. Never rely on one test, right? Remember COVID? If you catch it too early, too late, you might be negative. You need to do repeat tests, and you look at the change. Because one thing that's, again, a lot of naysayers are like, well, prostate cancer, a lot of them are just mild. They don't really advance. They're indolent. They'll just sit there in the organs, not going to metastasize. You're fine. Most men die with prostate cancer, not from prostate cancer. You heard this with and from thing. It sounds familiar. You heard it during COVID a lot too. But the issue is if the PSA is suddenly spiking, starts surging in rates, that's when you know that the disease is suddenly advancing, because there's a lot of other causes of high PSA, other enlarged prostate and many other conditions. But if it's surging, that's highly predictive of an advancing cancer. And the fact that Biden's doctor, the president of the United States doctors, didn't at least do this test, which again, we have early treatments for. You can actually do something about it. And it's not that expensive, right? It's just pee, and you can also do other digital examinations for. It's not that hard, not that expensive. We have interventions for it. The fact that they didn't do it is just insane. I can't wrap my head around this. And there's actually in guidelines from the American Cancer. I'll get into also the guidelines of American Cancer Society, because the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force is it's put out by HHS. This committee, the moment they start changing the guidelines, guess what? All the health insurance companies are mandated to cover this test. So there's a lot of people who don't like they like to get funny with the guidelines and try to really massage it down, because it's one of those things where, to keep healthcare costs low, right? But the American Cancer Society which I respect way more than U.S. Preventive Service Task Force, that set the stupid age 70 guideline. They are always like, no, there is no age per se. If you have less than 10-year life expectancy, maybe don't offer it, but they definitely say stop getting the test. And by the way, years ago, American Cancer Society wanted the age 40 mammograms. U.S. Preventive Service Task Force didn't. They wanted the age 45 colon cancer screening. U.S. Preventive Service Task Force didn't. But eventually they caught up, and they did, because with enough pressure, like, come on, we got to save more lives. Cancer rates, colon cancer are up on the rise.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is there's sort of like a political arm that might be potentially influenced probably as by lobbying that suggests, hey, the corporate health insurers, they don't want to cover all these screenings. Let's get these guidelines to where at 70, we're not paying for PSAs anymore, because maybe you've only got 10 years left per health guy, life expectancies or whatever. Same thing for mammograms. Maybe we don't want to do those starting at 40, like you said, or otherwise. It feels politically influenced on behalf
I can't
of the
say
insurance
for sure.
company.
It's one of those things, like, I don't have the hard data to say that, this is like all lobbying kind of things. You don't really actually say that this person was influenced. But these federal guidelines, I've seen it in the dietary guidelines world. You shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat that. Guess what? By the time it passes through federal review, it gets way watered down. And U.S. Preventive Service, it's a scientific body, but it's run by an agency, which actually, by the way, has been killed off. Agents for Healthcare Quality and Research has actually been killed off by HHS under RFK Jr. But it's a good agency. But the issue is, like, it's one of those things where, like, there are a lot of bean counters also in the room, right? As opposed to, let's maximize lives saved. Especially when you have a high VIP kind of person who's a vice president back in 2014 and the president of the United States and Canada, you should at least test for PSA. Damn those U.S. Preventive Service Task Force. Like, again, this is the minimizer group that previously says, oh, you don't need mammograms at age 40. You don't need colonoscopies at age 45. And eventually, after many, many decades of pressure, they relented. And so this is one of those things where, like, God, they need to get rid of this age 70 thing, because people are living way longer. And this age 70 is kind of like playing with this, average life expectancy is 75. We don't, but that's
it almost makes you a little like, as every individual watching this, we should almost be thinking like, hey, be careful. Some of the guidelines that say you should start having certain tests at a certain age may be driven by politics or accountants, like you said, bean counters, who are like, we don't want to cover all this stuff at this point, where maybe we should be thinking about certain testing earlier, I mean, or would you just recommend follow the guidelines by the American Cancer Society? What sort of
American Cancer Society is in my opinion, better. American Cancer is a nonprofit. It's not just a small dinky organization. It's been around for the longest time. They offer so much cancer services, but their scientific committees are world renowned. It's almost like an NIH, a CDC for the world of cancer. And I think they have it right. They're on the precautionary side, especially for a disease which you have early interventions for, right? And I think people just need to get this prostate cancer is mild thing out of their head. Prostate cancer is so common. Yes, a lot of them are mild, but the advanced one, let's just pretend advanced prostate cancer is a completely set of diseases. Advanced prostate cancer alone as a body is way more common than brain cancer, kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer. It is a huge burden on men in terms of cancer mortality, especially minority men, which again is already, like African Americans have way higher prostate cancer severity than white men, and they should get tested way more aggressively. But this is actually not that invasive a test. I don't know why it's people are trying to like cut down on this test. It's such a life-saving test. Fine, maybe you find many of you with indolent cancers which is not growing, but you should do the repeat test so you can see the changes in
The
this
changes.
velocity.
And I think that is interesting that you mentioned that, because really you could take a test 1 year and then, oh, okay, good, I don't have prostate cancer. But what you're saying is, unless you check again a couple years later, or
Right.
how frequently should you do it, whatever your recommendation is there, you can't see the delta basically, and that's what you want to measure.
You need to see the delta. Looking at a delta is way more important than looking at the absolute value, because the absolute value can be affected by many other diseases. Like, normally they said high is greater than 4, but there's, again, many other reasons you can be high. And that's where people is like, well, look at all these false positives, blah, blah, blah. No,
Right.
you need to do the repeat check. And the fact that Biden was never offered a repeat check, according to their spokesperson since 2014, is just insane. He's, president of the United States.
I commented.
President.
I totally agree with you. I commented, I replied to one of your X posts, your tweets, and I said, do you think that this is sort of like a monkey see no evil? And I want to see, maybe you can share your response on that, because I feel like it's very, well, if we don't check, we don't know, and we don't have to disclose. We did it in 24, we're good. I mean, what's your take on that? It feels a little slimy that they didn't do it, or almost malpractice, dare I say.
Yeah, so I have to said it was a little bit of a malpractice. Now, malpractice legally is like doing something against clinical code. So I'll just say it's my opinion that it is bad medicine, because he's elderly. That his family has history of cancer. His son Bo died of cancer as well, as and it runs in many other cancers run in the family. And the fact that he wasn't offered it, like, what were you thinking? It's been like 10 years. These doctors have to offer him something. And if he's the president and he's running for re-election, you expect him to live probably quite a while longer. So you need to do every precaution to do these tests. Now, whether they actually did or not, I don't really know. According to the statement, they didn't, which is, it's derelict malpractice of medicine, of like care. But even separate of medicine, the fact that no one even thought of offering it in his circle, like, who are his White House doctors? He goes to Walter Reed, our medical center, every year. They never bothered doing one, and then they said he is in perfect health. This is such an ostrich in the sand kind of moment, so I like your, see no evil, hear no evil, pretend there's no evil. It's same with the pandemic. If you don't test, there's no COVID, right? Oh God, there's so many analogies of the pandemic we can both, but this is just insane. And just, there's so much minimizers, because Biden's advisors, CDC advisors early on also told him, if you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID. And that was once true in 2020 and early 2021, when the variants hadn't emerged, right? But by like 2020, late 2021, with the alpha variant, in 2022 especially, and beyond, all these Delta variants and Omicron, it wasn't true anymore. And there was so much data that, and then became, if you test positive, you won't spread. Or it's going to be mild, or like don't worry about it. No one can get sick from you getting COVID if you already got vaccinated, and all these kind of like minimizer stuff. And the 6 feet rule, don't get me started on that one.
Well, we'll have to talk about that in a sec. What I want to know though is there a possibility? What was I going to say? Is there a possibility that had Biden been tested, he would have had to have stepped down because he would have been discovered to have, let's say, I don't know, stage 3 or some form of advanced cancer?
I don't think he necessarily had to step down, right? I think if you didn't have metastatic, right now he has metastatic cancer.
Right.
That's the problem. It's spreading, to other organs and to the bone. I think I read somewhere. I think if he had gotten tested earlier, maybe he would have had to undergone radiation or surgery to remove the prostate. But those are kind of like just short, brief kind of things. It doesn't really kind of inhibit you. I think but I think obviously the narrative would have been, he's a frail old man. And, and today, by the way, a member of Congress just died, Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia. And, he announces he had cancer like earlier this year, like in January or something. And, it's May and he already passed away. It's cancer can move very fast, especially if you don't test for it. And if we have tests for these. It's not like one of those things where like leukemia, sometimes it just pops up, and by the time there's no early predictors of early leukemia, or the advancement of this organ that could indicate cancer emerging or becoming more aggressive. For like brain cancer, I wish we had something like that. So many non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, they're so deadly. Pancreatic, that's so deadly. Steve Jobs, remember, he died of pancreatic cancer, and they caught it too late, and they weren't aggressive in treating it. I always tell people, whoever have some conspiracy about cancer, because I used to run a large cancer campaign, with like 5-6 million people, and so I've seen every kind of like snake oil kind of claim, or some sort of denial, or like, oh, you scientists have the cure for cancer, you're just holding it. And I'm like, look, a billionaire, Steve Jobs, who's the most neurotic person about life hacking anything, he died of cancer. And John McCain, one of the most powerful members of Congress, died of cancer. And all these litany of famous people died of cancer. You think that there's an actual cure and we're just hiding it? Come on, there's the conspiracy out there.
It sounded like Jobs was going for some form of like holistic treatment path as opposed to
he
traditional
did
measures.
And it delayed his actual treatment. And he actually said he regretted it. It was one of those things that he very much regretted, that he delayed and didn't pursue much more aggressive therapy.
Do you think there's a benefit to these? And I see this marketed all the time, these like holistic body screens or whatever, like these blood tests or whatever. To me, it seems like once your CBC, your complete blood count says your white blood cells are elevated, it's like leukemia. It's probably too late anyway, but I don't know. Like, what's your opinion on these things?
Well, I think, first of all, these whole body scans are very expensive unless you fly overseas, and medical tourism is not something we should, tout in America, as in like, if America's so great, why do you have to fly elsewhere for these much more?
It's funny you say that. I keep seeing these TikTok videos of people like, I get IVF in Turkey and it costs me less than 10 grand. Here it's $100,000 or whatever. Oh, maybe maybe less than that, but still.
I know, but it's still like, this is not a public health solution, right? This is a rich people solution. I work in public health. I try to think like, how can we save more lives, not just for the boutique bespoke crowd, right? Like, look, if we truly had an early identifiable biomarker for brain cancer or pancreatic cancer or ovarian cancer, one of my friends wouldn't be dying right now. I like, these are the things where it is so ridiculous to kind of say that, oh, we have this magical thing, that you guys don't have. If we had it, it would be on the cover. Trust me, if we had developed one of these tests that can predict some of these cancers, like, or say, wow, you have this cancer very early on, it would be like cover of like New England Journal of Medicine and like the news worldwide. There's no cover up around this, and there's no magical thing. Maybe you'll find a few extra, maybe this mole is like, perhaps cancerous, but again, we're saying skin cancer. Some are not, it's like some like squamous cell carcinoma. It's not very dangerous. The melanoma is dangerous, but again, we don't really have good screening tests other than, look for everything that emerges. But this is where you have to be vigilant. And the fact that Biden wasn't, his doctors weren't vigilant about this, it's derelict and insane. And I don't even know. Like, I'm so mad at U.S. Preventive Service Task Force right now for them putting out this less than 70 test, over 70 don't bother testing. It is just insane. It's just like when back in the day they said, oh, for age 40-year-old, no mammograms. Age 45, no need for colon cancer. It's just,
that's crazy. What do you think? And this I feel like is a stretch, but do you think that the the advancement of Biden's cancer could have affected his cognitive function? It seems very different, but some people allege that maybe small bits have started developing in the brain, and maybe that's why we saw some of that advanced decline.
I can't really comment in terms of medicine. Like, obviously, if you had brain cancer, it would, right? A brain tumor
Yeah.
would, but we don't have any. I don't have medical records, and I have, we haven't seen these kind of things. But it's one of those things where I don't know how long he's had it. That's the other thing. Like, did he just have advanced prostate cancer this year, or did this did this pop up like 2 years ago? Right. So I can't really speculate on that at all. But
yeah, I guess they'd have to do a brain scan and see if there are any tumors in there, which again, I feel like is a little bit monkey see no evil. Like, oh, no, we just don't want to check, I don't know.
I think they probably had some like off the books tests, to be honest, for various diseases. I can't imagine the president of the United States not having that. I don't know. Like, maybe like there's a Walter Reed official physical, right? And then there's like a private, medical kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. Like they put out maybe the White House medical and not the Walter Reed one, in other words. Now, do you think that these are things that I wouldn't be surprised end up getting subpoenaed or whatever by the Trump administration, and they look to uncover some, every bit of testing that was done? I don't know if they could do it with HIPAA, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Trump figures out how to do everything he wants.
Yeah, I think private medical records you can't get at. That's just it's pretty ironclad. You can't get at that. It is what it is, unless it's official government release that they decide to disclose. Look, Biden. I've talked to many people, and Biden's health has been on the decline for a long time. You don't even need to read Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's book to know that it was true. Cognitive is one thing. Cancer, the other thing is like you become extremely lethargic over time, right? You become very, very easily tired. And I think in the book they were saying 4 p.m. was the end of his workday. Basically, he just retired after 4 p.m. to go back to the East Wing. So,
and we heard that he'd have to take naps as well during debate preparations or whatever. So maybe those were all early indicators where, a doctor that actually cared, and followed science would have maybe done some extra screening panels, huh?
Yeah, I think honestly they should have done a whole slew of different other tests. We'll never know, honestly, but at the very least, what I care Biden's health. It's unfortunate. I don't even wish bad health on anyone, regardless of political thing. But the issue I care about is like the message that it sends to other people, the lay general population are watching. Because now they're like, oh, prostate cancer is mild. If you're over 70, you don't need to test. Because when people hear that, it's like, oh, that's kind of like, oh, old people. It sounds stupid. Old people, lay people hear old people are immune. That's what it sounds like, right? Or old people, you don't need to worry about it. This disease is that, or like, don't worry about it. It barely progresses. But many prostate cancers don't progress. But as a whole, if you take just advanced prostate cancer, let's just pretend it's a completely different disease. It's a huge number of people who have regional and advanced prostate cancer. And it's just people need to think of the denominator, right?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about this argument that Tapper? I'd love to hear maybe just a brief summary on his book from your POV, but this idea that Tapper, the Wall Street Journal editorial board just literally laser focused on Tapper and said he had plenty of spokespeople from the White House on CNN talking about how Biden's fine, even after the debate. How does Tapper reconcile that? Because it seems like he was basically telling the Democratic viewing audience that Biden is fine.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where you could say the same for Bob Woodward. Like, if you're a news reporter, your job is to report the news now, not, ooh, I'm going to keep this for my future book. You know, you could say the same for Maggie Haberman's books, right? There's all this like juice. They keep these juiciest nuggets for, let's keep it in my book as and like a teaser for my book when it comes out. No, you're a reporter. Like you're not a movie premiere kind of person. Like, oh, let's do teasers for Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible movie, right the week before it premieres. But like, no, this is the news. People need to know now, and I think sometimes it's very frustrating. And the other thing is, I will give him credit that a lot of his sources will only speak anonymously, or they'll say, I'll tell you the truth, but you can't report it. And it's one of those like, gotcha kind of situations where, like, if you're in the news business, you want to know, right? But it has this almost like this NDA or friend DA kind of clause for a lot of these sources. Like, if you tattle, I'm never going to tell you again. So I get it. So if you want to keep reporting other news, you won't be able. For these certain nuggets, they have to keep it locked tight, and that's how the DC or the media in general works, where most people don't want to go on the record. Because if all reporting were based on quotable sources that's on the record, like, we wouldn't get most of the truth out in this world. So I do actually recognize the fact that you do need anonymous sources, but what they do oftentimes is some will say, well, you didn't hear from me, but you can go confirm it with other people. And if 2 or 3 anonymous, these unreported sources confirm, then they run a story. But sometimes they say, I'll tell you, but you cannot report this whatsoever, right? And so I don't know. The media sometimes access is so important. I think at the end of the day, it was a very difficult thing. He has to still bring on panelists, and he's not responsible for what the panelists that he brings on. But the people who do know the truth wouldn't go on TV in the first place or tell him.
I mean, it's a good point, because really what you're saying is the anchor to some extent is a puppet of the media organization. The anchors on Fox are a puppet of what the Fox leadership wants. Right. Same for CNN or whatever. And I think that's also
decide.
Exactly. And I think that's why you're seeing some of these producers step down at like CBS or there was another one just now. I think it was MSNBC. I'm not sure. But some of these producers are stepping down because they're in lawsuits with the Trump administration. and the broader organizations are like, well, how about we settle? We'll fire that producer that was, anti-Trump. And really, Trump is kind of magically taking over all of the news media.
This is authoritarianism. By the way, there are no critics of Vladimir Putin in Russia. They're all dead or fired. Which let's be honest. Like, as much as I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and I tell them, look, do you really want us to be Russia, where as much as you guys hate MSNBC and other liberal news outlets, do you really want to live in a world where we have Baghdad Dad praising, how great Saddam Hussein is, or be one of these North Korean puppets who's like, oh, our great leader is wonderful, he can do no wrong. Like, come on. Like, and then silencing all critics. This is really how you fall into darkness and in fascism and dystopia. Like, I don't think that's what you want. But at the same time, for CBS, like right now, they're trying to go through a merger, right? A merger acquisition kind of deal. And they're being held up by the FCC because the FCC decides whether it goes through. In the meantime, conveniently, there's a, couple $1 billion lawsuit filed by Trump. And I think they said, we'll settle it for $50 million. I think that's what they privately said. We'll settle it for $50 million. Which is like such an obvious bribe shakedown. And
well, of course, it's hey, if you fire your anti-Trump producers, we'll lower the settlement we're willing to take, and you'll happen to get FTC sign off, because after all, if they don't do what Trump wants, Trump will just fire them and find somebody who wants. So it actually shows you the power of the Trump administration right now. It's
a North Korean Putin Russia kind of power. It is the power of the dark side. Like, the other day, I like on the May 4th, Trump posted, may the 4th be with you. But it was actually like, I don't think they quite get it. He was holding a red lightsaber. That's like the lightsaber of the dark side, right? For anyone who watches Star Wars, like, yes, you wield the power to silence all your critics with the FCC and many other, Doge and other kind of things that you can do. But it's like the destruction of America. And I think, this is where people like America, the US dollar as a, the currency of the world, the world's reserve currency. I watch your show a lot, and it's literally going to fall apart. The reason our interest rates are spiking is because people are dumping US dollar, right? And this. It's because of the lack of confidence. This is why the Moody downgrade happened. And the Moody downgrade because people are fleeing the dollar, and hence, the Treasury have to soar in interest rates to offer the same
right,
bonds.
to get people to go shopping for it. You got to compensate with the higher rates.
You want lower interest rate, but Trump wants lower interest rates. But everything he's doing on this side, whether it's the tariff war, which is a whole different mess, or this kind of like silencing of all critics and just creating this fascist movement, is going to kill the economy. Like I tell my friends, on the right, like this is literally killing democracy, because most of the US dollar is overseas, not in the United States. All these people using the US dollar, they're buying all these treasury bonds. A lot of them are actually outside the US. And if they're dumping it, that's going to make our interest rates soar because of the lack of confidence of what Trump is doing in destroying the fabric of society. But
it really hurts like the small and medium businesses too, which are a core fabric to sort of employment in America. I mean, who knows how it all ends up shaking out. But one thing I definitely want to ask you a few questions, kind of zooming back, if you will, to the COVID days a bit, and because there are some things that I think publicly have gotten this horrible perception. And I'll start with a quick analogy. When we have a bad hurricane in Florida, people get prepared, they'll put their shutters up or whatever, because all the news is saying, shutter up, put shutters up. Hurricane comes and it's a nothing burger. The next hurricane that comes, half as many people put their hurricane shutters up because they're like, well, the news lied the last time. They were wrong last time, so I'm not going to put my shutters up, which I think is pretty dumb, because then they get destroyed and, their roof lifts off and they die or whatever. Okay. So that analogy said, I want to start with this mask disaster, because we first heard from the Fauci team, don't buy masks. And the idea was we need to keep those in hospitals because we don't want the supply to be gone. But that then turned into masks don't work because people were also wearing like cloth rags that were like this, not covering their nose. So my opinion, and I want to hear yours, is that a quality mask like an N95 actually works really well, especially if you don't have facial hair. Like a P100, even better. The KN95, maybe 90% good, whatever. But this idea that masks don't work, I think really got politicized because of either misuse or misquoting. Where's your stance on that?
Yeah, it definitely got politicized. And I think that's also the fault of the political bad actors who try to make it like I'm an alpha male, I don't wear masks, God gave me an immune system. And, but, God gave you an immune system, but, a third of Europe died during the plague, God gave them an immune system too. I think, first of all, early on, there was many FUBAR kind of things. There was a lack of supply. That's a big can of worms, of course. There was also the issue that early on, from a scientific perspective, Fauci and CDC did not recognize that COVID was airborne. Because once something is airborne, it's everything. I was making fun of the 6 feet rule. I make fun of the 6 feet rule because it's stupid. The 6 feet rule is only for droplets. Just like when you fire a cannon, gravity will pull it down. And most of the time, the force of our expulsion, a droplet will be pulled down by gravity. But no, this is airborne. It stays in the air. There's these micro droplets stay in the air for like 20 minutes or several hours, And if you have bad ventilation in a bathroom, it just stays there, especially when you flush a toilet. It's just, whew. And so they didn't recognize it was airborne, even though there's so much data it was airborne. So I think that's another FUBAR thing that really screwed up the pandemic reaction, because had we just recognized that this virus is airborne from the get-go, as many other, like in Asia, they recognize, we wouldn't have this same problem. And again, if you recognize it's airborne, even a cloth mask catches a good number of particles. Now, will it protect you from, inhaling all of it? No, of course not. Surgical mask a little bit better, and KN95, N95 much more better. But they just stuck to this. Sometimes policymakers have this thing where once you declare something, they stick to the guns, even against all the other onslaught of evidence. And it takes like a tsunami or hurricane of evidence before they're like, okay, I was wrong. Right? And then the walk back is always, in the DC politics, the walk back is they never admit fault. They just say, well, there's been new information, blah, blah, blah. But no, they were wrong. We had the information from the beginning. So all that was such a foobar cluster of a mess. And
so bad government response on top of then media confusion or political,
and also the politicization of like this, I'm a strong man, I don't need a vaccine, I don't need masks, God gave me an immune system, all I need to take is a vitamin D hydroxychloroquine, vitamin C ivermectin kind of thing, which is still, that's a whole different beast of, I don't know I feel like the ivermectin hydroxychloroquine is a pump and dump. Like it's a stock pump and dump. Like someone like hoarded it, and they're doing like pumping the masses on the right to use it. I don't understand this.
Are they functional at all? These drugs? Like, what have you found? The ivermectin?
No, so they're not. They're not, especially against a severe disease or severe COVID or whatsoever. Like there's some early studies but then they were quickly debunked. So there's a lot of bad studies that's published. By the way, when you retract the study, not all websites reveal that it was retracted. Or say you publish a study and someone did a meta-analysis by averaging all these other studies. But if one of the studies was already retracted, the meta-analysis itself doesn't get a retraction notice, even though one of its component studies that it averaged had been retracted. So then it's just like kept, and then of course, it, like any pump and dump, once one side wants to just pump this news in their ecosystem so much that it blots out all other, the saying, misinformation can go around the world 3-4 times before the truth has a chance to get its boots on, right? And that's, it's like, a pump and dump works so fast for any kind of like stock trading that before someone could like debunk, no, that's actually not what's happening with the company. It's already completed. And I think that's where sometimes there's politicization, there's all these weird shit that's going on in social media where it's clearly being pushed by one side. And for what gain?
I think a lot was started with like this sort of the Joe Rogan sort of POV, which obviously appeals to a very male-centric audience. Yeah. And a younger audience, this idea that, hey, I took these drugs or whatever, and I didn't get anything. Do you think I think what happens is there's sort of this like confirmation bias where it's like, well, I didn't wear a mask and I didn't die. Yeah, well, 1/10 of 1% of the world did, which is a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a survivor bias in many situations. And also, I always want to remind people the famous pirate phrase, dead men tell no tales. If you had died, right? If you had died, you don't get a chance to scream from the grave, mask up. COVID is not mild. Don't use hydroxychloroquine and don't listen to these, crazy wackos, influencers who are just trying to sell you a buck, on the internet. Listen to your actual, mainstream doctors and health organizations and public health agencies. Like they don't have that chance. And so, and again, if you survive, you feel invulnerable. It's like,
right.
I lived through it. It's like, tough shit.
Well, there's also, I think,
muscle through,
There's the other aspect of COVID that's so interesting too, is when it first hit, it was really virulent and deadly. But now COVID is like a common cold. It's sort of decayed. Like I look at it as sort of like almost this reverse exponential severity. This is my opinion. You know, I'm not a doctor, but my opinion is that it was so novel at the beginning that now it's like a common cold. It's basically decayed in nature.
Okay, we do have a lot more immunity, but when it emerged, no one had immune system to it, right? It's like remember when the Europeans, the conquistadors came to settle North America, and like 90% of the Native American North American population basically were killed off by disease because they didn't have the benefit of surviving the Black Death and all the plagues that happened in Europe, in the Middle East, in the old world. And so when COVID emerged, no one had immunity. And by the way, New York got hit very hard because it had the virus came from Europe. By the way, didn't come from China. The bulk of we know from genetics, the virus that infected New York and started the first wave came from Europe.
Wow.
But it didn't hit a lot of the rural areas and didn't hit the South. The South is warmer, but back in May and April, and so it didn't hit them as hard. But again, if it didn't hit them as hard, it's not real, right? And so over time, yes, we developed an immune system, but immunity against this issue. But the problem is that the virus mutates, right? Omicron, there was a huge wave of Omicron cases and a lot of hospitalizations as well. And Delta was really bad, especially for the unvaccinated areas in the South. It was really bad. Even if you were previously infected, Delta can leapfrog over your immunity. It's almost like some people say, like, was Delta variant and like Omicron, we already had the virus. Are they kind of like a new thing? Oh, I think it's a force majeure kind of thing where like, you thought you were immune. Delta and Omicron came along and boom. And also, I want to just push back a little bit on the COVID is mild thing now. It's not the common cold, because the common cold, there's no long common cold, long flu right now, as much as long COVID. See, this is always how the news cycle is. Like, if you don't see it on the surface, like someone could approach you and have long COVID, but they have brain fog, they have increased kidney disease risk, heart disease risk, stroke risk, but you don't see it from your outer complexion, right? They're not deathly ill in a hospital bed. They're not deathly ill at home. So even though they kind of recover, they can walk, they can talk, they can eat and socialize and play video games and watch podcasts, it doesn't mean that they're better. And by the way, the long COVID thing, it accumulates. One is worse than 0, 2 is worse than 1, 3 is worse than 2 infections. It's really bad. It really is additive, but you don't see it. And this is always a thing where if you don't see something, that's below the surface, you don't recognize how big the total problem is. I always also tell people, car accidents, you talk about car insurance surging. Car accidents have surged a lot after the pandemic. And it wasn't because people suddenly forgot to drive their cars. No, it was because I think, the people were brain fogged for the longest time. It's kind of, so basically a lot of people, like, they actually did a study that people who are tired or people who are like brain fog or have these other conditions, when they're driving, it's as if they're having like some degree of alcohol in their blood, or it's like as if they're sleep deprived for like 40 hours with no sleep, like medical residents. They're actually not making the best decisions. And I think on outside, someone who's a little bit tipsy or is sleep deprived, this looks okay. But in terms of actual functionality, I think it shows up in the car accident rates that surged during and after the pandemic.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I just did a quick little Google just to look because it's so interesting, and I want to save this for later. But the lingering effects of COVID-19 on neurological function may be a risk factor for behavior leading to road deaths. Obviously, this goes a lot deeper, but that's incredible. I never thought about that, because you're right. Like, COVID today has become so mild in terms of when you are sick, but like you say, the long-term impacts just aren't visible to other people.
Right.
I think that's what we're looking at when we say,
right?
Exactly. Right. Now, what I do want to touch on is this obviously, the whole origins of COVID and Wuhan and the funding of research in Wuhan. I just want to share my perspective of this, and I want you to criticize it and tell me what I'm missing. My understanding is we in Wuhan essentially conducted research into not only sort of aerolized vaccines, but also sort of directed evolution of monkeys or chimpanzees or whatever, where we take a sick batch of monkeys, we pick the sickest out of 5, and then we introduce that sickest to another group of 5, and then the next group of sick 5, we take the sickest from that, and we basically direct the sickest monkey regularly to continue to infect ongoing groups of monkeys. And that way we can find and study the most infectious and essentially try to find vaccines or cures to that. That's my understanding of directed evolution, along with obviously sort of like the warfighter, aerolized sterilizations of bats that, research funding had gone into in caves in China. Like, I'm obviously way oversimplifying all of this. But my question is, how much of what I've just said sort of aligns with what actually happens in practice based on what your knowledge is out there?
Yeah, so the lab leak topic is not my favorite topic in the world because it's heavily politicized. We don't actually have true good smoking like gun evidence of what truly happened. But yes, there's a lot of studies that show that if we call passaging, this directed evolution, you allow the virus to mutate, you can direct it towards the evolution to become much more virulent of a virus or more severe of a virus. Or to be honest, a virus doesn't need to be more severe or virulent. It can just be more contagious. A more contagious virus will kill more people than a more severe virus. Like if a virus is half as severe but twice as contagious, that the twice as contagious virus that's half as severe will kill more people than the more severe, less contagious.
Because the multiplier effects, eh?
The multiplier. It's the denominator. I always tell people the denominator. It's like the prostate cancer. The denominator really is what matters. So I think that the issue is a lot of virus research. I think the lab conditions can be improved. We know that leaks happen. They're not foolproof. I think there was even like the latest study on that maybe the Marburg virus in Africa was due to a leak from a research institute that, by the way, the U.S. had funded as well. So, these are kind of things where we mess up, right, as well. It's not like just China messed up potentially. But, we don't really know that for sure because we really don't have any evidence of whatsoever. But, we mess up all the time. And I think lab accidents happen. I think we shouldn't make it this country was this. No, it was just maybe it was some scientists. And also the other problem is whenever you talk about lab leak, some people, maybe it's a natural virus. It could have been a virus we caught from nature, it leaked. Or it could be a virus that we're kind of trying to develop immunotherapies against and trying to, make it evolve in a different way, and then it leaked. And then there's those who are true conspiracy theorists who are like, oh, we bioengineered it to become a bioweapon, and then leaked it. But the thing is, you say one thing, it could have maybe a lab leak. The conspiracy folks, they hear bioweapon, they jump off the deep end, and I think that's what oftentimes can happen to these kind of narratives of.
That's sort of my impression too. Is that look, it was probably a mistake. I don't think that I don't think somebody was trying to create a weapon, because I do think researchers are truly trying to find cures. That's at least my belief of the purposes of research. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
And so I think that a lab scientist also have this doth protest too much situation where, they should recognize that lab leaks do happen and they should clean up their act a little bit. But their fear is that they are going to be heavily regulated. And if their industry, it's like, nuclear research is highly regulated, right? You can't just willy-nilly share nuclear research. They fear that if it becomes heavily government regulated, that their entire field will just come to a crawl. And I think that's I think the DOF protest too much issue. I care about public health.
Why wouldn't they? Like, what's a reason for not using higher BSL safety standards at these labs? Because I believe when they were conducting coronavirus research, they were using, if I remember this correctly, BSL level 2, and for something like this, they should have been like a 3 or 4.
Yeah,
is it just money?
4, but well, I think because the number of BSL 4s are really rare, and 3s are much more expensive than 2s to maintain. And I think that's where, this gets into like industry and, the cost of research. I think the cost of research, the cost of research overall is way too high. The cost of like commercialization for developing any immunotherapy is also way too high. We should accelerate it in some ways. And, by the way, if you want to enroll someone in a clinical trial, people don't know this. Oftentimes it costs you like $30,000 to $50,000 per head. So I want to enroll like someone in a study. It costs them 30 or 40 grand a head to enroll a person in a hospital for a clinical trial. And like, it shouldn't cost that much. It really shouldn't. The overhead of some of these is insane. Someday I want to solve this. We'll talk when I'm ready to talk about my plan to solve this. But like, I think there's a lot of actually like cheaper research in terms of like a lot of supplements that could actually work. There's a lot of supplements that's like trash. And by the way, a lot of social media, YouTube there's a lot of pumping of supplements. Oh, here's my energy drink. Here's my vitality pill, right?
Right.
Much merch hawking. And I think most of them, they either don't work or could be dangerous. I think some of them could work, but there's the cost to actually prove it is so high. And oftentimes, if the FDA doesn't regulate it, why should
Well, that's the thing is, they're not regulated as drugs. They're not regulated as a food. Supplements are just, go ahead and buy them with no regulation. I've spoken to a German ER doctor about supplements, and she says her opinion on it is Americans have the most expensive urine in the world.
I agree. Look, I think vitamins are important if you're like nutrient deficient. In a lot of developing countries, they need these vitamins fortification supplementation. But in the United States, the number of people with deficient, the only things that are people really deficient, I think vitamin B12 for vegans and vegetarians, and vitamin D.
Because you're getting that from salmon or meat, which they're not eating.
And I think vitamin D. And actually, I'm a big proponent of vitamin D. And there's a lot of good studies on vitamin D, and also folic acid. Folic acid is really key, not just for pregnant women or women who are about to be pregnant, but I think it's also really good against alcohol. There's actually studies where we actually have long-term cohort studies at Harvard, which, by the way, has all been canceled. I just can't emphasize that the Trump administration has canceled virtually like 95 or 99% of all medical research grants at Harvard as for retaliation. But from this same study, Nurses Health Study and health professionals, these 30, 40 year studies, we actually know a lot about cancer, and it takes these kind of long-term studies to find out. But for example, folic acid, like alcohol causes every cancer under the sun, every cancer, there's no exception. But if you have high folic acid, there's actually studies that it actually negates the effects of alcohol on cancer for, say, breast cancer adenoma and colorectal adenoma, these major cancer tumors. And it's not talked about. Like, you're not going to find it, but it's published. It's buried in the research that we published. It's not in the lay discussions or anything like that. But if we truly want to prevent cancer, we need to also, and given how everywhere alcohol is, we need to actually have way higher levels of folic acid, not just in women.
I think the thing, unfortunately, just with, and this is my opinion, maybe criticize this too, but my opinion is that our society has been taught that fat is bad and sugar is bad. And so what are the largest sources of folic acid? Okay, nuts. Oh, too high in fat. Meanwhile, they're like the healthiest thing under the sun. Citrus fruits, high in folic acid. Oh, too much sugar. I don't want to eat that. So what do Americans end up eating? It's 0-calorie soft drinks and high fructose corn syrup, or the manufactured foods that are designed around, oh, well, this will lower your calorie count. I don't know. In my opinion, that's broken nutrition. Do you think RFK can help solve that? And am I wrong to take the POV?
Oh my God. Like, I think it's one of those things where every once in a while, RFK is right about, say, food dyes. I agree with that.
The red dye.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of other dyes that we need to remove. But he's wrong. It's like a broken clock's right twice a day kind of thing. There's tons of other things. His administration just rolled back regulations on 2 PFASs for these forever chemicals. And I'm like, did they just do that? Like, everyone knows PFAS is bad. They just rolled back. You should go watch that movie Dark Waters and look at the history of these these C8 and PFOAs and PFAS. It's really bad. I can't believe they just rolled that back. And also, by the way, as a nutrition scientist, I wear different hats. I'm an epidemiologist, but my other doctorate is in nutrition. This is why I talk about nutrition as well so much. Like, what the hell is going on with seed oil? Like, we should have a whole episode debunking nutritional claims. I know this is not, we started at prostate cancer. We're going, by the way, prostate cancer is the second most dietary cancer after colon cancer. Some cancers are not very
related,
dietary.
Right? Because it's all, here's sort of the media POV, and it all relates back to nutrition and health. So,
Yeah,
you
can predict a lot of things. Like, obesity is a major cause. Obesity causes most cancers. The exception is premenopausal breast cancer. But breast cancer is a whole different beast. I could spend hours on this. But obesity, alcohol, it's not just smoking. Like, people just think, oh, you get smoking from cancer. No, obesity, alcohol. But it's one of those things where, you can't talk about too much because then you're going to fat shame. You can't tell people not to drink because then you're just a party pooper and a prohibitionist. I'm like, no, I think there should be moderation, but people need to recognize that it does add to cancer. And I think most people think it's some sort of like, oh, I got radiation poison or radon poison that gave me cancer. No, most things that give you cancer are these like small incremental things that you do every day in your life that adds up to these risks. It's almost like PFAS. It's like it accumulates in your body. It's a forever chemical. Like, the levels in drinking water are very low, but they accumulate everywhere. And over time, by the way, microwave popcorn, really high in PFAS. Tons of other, sofas and couches have like these, the flame retardants. That's PFAS. Like, we have all these kinds of, they accumulate over time, these dust and particles. And nutrition is the same way. Like, you are what you eat, and you're not going to get a heart attack the next day from a burger or bacon. But over time, across your entire lifetime, you do this every single day, day in, day out, over your life. It's gonna give you potentially heart disease or cancer. And I think people should realize that most diseases, it's like filling a water jug. You don't get instantly. It's not like something like instantly breaks the jug and you get this big disease. It's you fill up the tank enough, and eventually, there's going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back, and that eventually, it's not the straw that really broke the back. It's the accumulation of all these things over your life.
Where were you going with the seed oils? Because I agree with what you're saying, this sort of the habit of longer term exposure to chemicals, and whether it's sodas or foods or whatever. Where were you going with the seed oils?
The seed oil thing is, they completely reversed it. So they're saying all these like vegetable oils are bad, No, actually, they're actually really healthy. We know from decades of research, and we don't mean decades of research on a couple hundred people or a couple thousand. We're talking about 250,000, 500,000, millions of people, if you add up all the studies around the world, that have been followed for decades. So we're talking about like hundreds of millions of person years, billions of person years of data that we know that trans fat is definitely bad, right? Trans fat is a different beast. Saturated fat is not good. Monounsaturated fat is better, and polyunsaturated fat, which is these vegetable oils, overall are way, way better. And I think, for example, we even have studies that eat mayonnaise actually lowers your risk of heart disease. It's not publicized,
right. But people get
it
confused
has a
because
lot
the
of
egg
really
debate.
good healthy oils and fats. And so for those who are saying like seed oil is bad, they're claiming it causes inflammation, blah 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 blah. Arachidonic acid could convert, but that pathway is like very, very narrow. And we've actually studied this. What they're talking about is like too much N6 oils. Omega-3 and N3s are good, and these N6 is bad. No, N6 is, these polyunsaturated fats are actually pretty good. And we actually looked at the N6 N3 ratio. This is stuff that we've taught this study for decades.
This is actually like
seed oils are not the cause. They actually
I actually want to like double down on that for a moment for folks, because my understanding here is that ideally you should have a ratio of about 4 N6s, so omega-6s, to 1 omega-3. That's the ideal ratio. That's the ratio you find in the Mediterranean diet. It's associated with, longer life, lower heart disease, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, you could throw in like the olive oil, like the omega-9, and it doesn't affect that ratio.
Olive oil is mostly monounsaturated. So it's not.
Oh, got it. My understanding is the American ratio is so screwed up. It's like 24 to 1 as opposed to 4 to 1.
But we don't have proof that 24 to 1 is bad. Like when we look at this ratio N6 N3, it's monotonically or it's neutral in terms of the ratio. Like because N3, by the way, N3 polyunsaturated versus N6 omega-6, omega-3, N6 N3, they're same thing.
Right.
There's not like the ratio does not increase the risk. It's not like the ratio, there's a curve, like, a certain level, then it gets bad or something like that. No, it's monotonic means the same like direction. It doesn't actually increase the risk. Both of them are good. And the other thing people don't realize is substitution. Like, look, we have finite number of hours in the day. If we watch too much TV, we're doing something. We're not doing something else. If we're running, we're displacing something else. If we're not sleeping, we're not doing something else. Where time is finite, but nutrition is finite too. 99% of us are not training for marathons, and we're not bulking up to gain weight. We're just trying to add an equilibrium. So whatever your daily calorie equilibrium, you eat until then. So anything you eat is displacing something else. And the issue in American diet is we eat too much like refined carbs, like white bread.
Yeah.
Even rice is a refined, white rice is a refined carb.
Sure.
And the issue is in nutrition, it's like if you tell people to eat more avocados, yes, but what are you displacing, right? If you're displacing other healthy things, it's kind of neutral. But if you're displacing like bacon and sausages, avocados are definitely good for you. But also you can't overeat. You can't eat 3,000-4,000 calories of avocados. That's also going to cause metabolic problems, right? So it's think of diet like time. The issue is most of the time in American diet, like saturated fat. Saturated fat is bad, but it's bad versus what? It's bad versus the mono and the polyunsaturated fats. But it's kind of even against the white carbs. And most Americans don't eat whole grains. Let's be honest. By the way, the American fun fact, the number one whole grain in American diet is popcorn. If it weren't for popcorn, like a whole grain would be way lower. The movie industry is actually saving us from a whole grain on whole grain.
Yeah.
But saturated fat is actually bad, but if you look at it as a comparison versus like white carb, it's kind of like they're equally bad. And so it looks like it's not as bad. Because most of the time, if you could tell people eat less saturated fat, oftentimes people will go to carbs, right? Or they go to bad proteins like bacon and sausages.
Right. And I think that's probably the association where, if you go have a burger and fries, you're going to have a massive exposure to N6s because of the oils in the fries. But let's be real, it's the frying that's unhealthy, right? I mean, that's my opinion.
No, but I think we should just I really want to debunk the seed oil N6 thing. There's no evidence. We have all these studies that higher N6 does not increase your risk of disease in terms of in all these large studies. You might find some laboratory stuffs, or some retrospective studies where we ask people who are already sick what they previously did. No, those are not reliable and they don't really count. It's the long-term studies. The long-term studies that really matter. And they're definitive. It's you don't just see it in the US where, maybe the American diet is a little weird. You see this in in Europe, you see this in Japan, you see this in Australia, you see this in studies around the world where very different diets, polyunsaturated fat, N6s included, are good for you. And they're way better than other oils because this beef tallow obsession, beef tallow lard thing, yeah, okay, they don't go as rancid, but for the most part, frying, you're not at a commercial fryer and you're frying the same oil for a month, right? I wouldn't fry vegetable oil for a month. Yeah, but you can fry it at home and use it and dump it out the next day. It's fine, And I think that's where all this beef tallow lard thing, there's high in saturated fats. Yeah, fine. They don't go rancid. You can fry them repeatedly over time, a little bit more than vegetable, but you can't fry them for a month. But they're saturated fats, and saturated fats are not objectively overall healthy because for the studies that show that they don't increase risk, if you actually look at those studies, it's saturated fat in place of carbs. Because whenever you study nutrition, whenever you study nutrition, you can't have ad lib unlimited. Say you have a 2,000 calorie diet, average calorie diet. It's not we're saying you can, have an excess above 2,000 because that's not a natural diet. You're always substituting for something else. And the default substitution in nutritional studies, we actually have a name for it. It's called isocaloric substitution, if you want to read all about it. It's to substitute for the most common other thing, which is carbs. And most carb in America is processed white carb, not whole grains.
Bread. Yeah, exactly. Just full empty calories. You've stripped out the B vitamins from the germ and the bran. So what are you eating? Right. You should really focus on whole wheat.
It's high glycemic load. That's a whole nother issue. Basically, Americans
I want to hit you mentioned Harvard, and a lot of people, when it comes to Harvard, bring up, Harvard has this $53 billion endowment. What do they need money for? And, I looked into this a little bit. Colleges function off of yield on their endowment. It's sort of like their retirement balance, and then they seek a yield. Harvard's is 6 or 7%, and then they function off of that 6 or 7% yield, which might be, say, $3 billion a year or whatever. And at Harvard, it looked to me, based on their 24 and 23 financials, they were spending about twice as much money on research than what they were getting from the federal government. So in other words, they get money from the federal government for research and they spend twice as much. So they're basically feeding research at a loss because it's not necessarily the most immediately profitable.
Right. Now and also I want to emphasize that Harvard endowment. The endowment mostly sits in the main school. They don't share endowments across schools. So let's think. The wealthiest schools are basically arts and science school, where the main college and grad school is. And then business schools are very wealthy. The law school is very wealthy. The medical school is wealthy. But guess where most of the research sits? The School of Public Health. The School of Public Health endowment is it doesn't even pop 1 billion. It is so low. And most of the School of Public Health is literally hand to mouth, eating hand to mouth, grants and direct funding. And tuition is not even that major of an issue. The school, where the money is actually in the poorest schools. Where the research is in the poorest schools. Where the money is actually in the wealthiest schools, and they don't share money across the schools. So it would be great if the arts and science school could share more money with the School of Public Health, but that's not how it is. And most research is from the grants. Most faculty researcher salaries, maybe the school pays 5-10% of your salary. The rest, you eat what you kill, literally from whatever grants you get. So if you get a promotion, you get the privilege to pay yourself more from the own money that you hunted down. it's a very it's very dark and difficult thing for many people to understand. So whenever they kill
Okay,
this
so
research,
smaller budget at these health schools. So how do these cuts now affect research at Harvard?
they're getting first of all, a lot of these researchers, especially the junior ones, are being laid off. The senior ones maybe have researchers may have other grants like from other foundations that they can hold on, but the lower junior researchers, they're getting killed off basically. The universities, I don't know the specifics. The university is probably subsidizing them for the end of the year or something, but it's bad. And I think the other greater the HR is just one side. The other thing is the continuity of the research, like to get the true research on the long-term causes of Alzheimer's. You can't do a 5-year research on Alzheimer's. You can't do even 10-year research on Alzheimer's. Most of the causes are like 20, 30 years ago. And the outcomes, if you want to accumulate enough, Alzheimer's people to study the long-term causes and all the different causes, you actually need continuity. And the fact that these studies are being terminated means that they're going to miss follow-up. There will be huge gaps if we even restart these studies. So I think this is the end of those studies that's been going on for 30, 40 years. Like, if you wanted to get more studies on what causes aging and all these other disease risks, we're out of money. So
what you're saying is this is actually even worse because we're not just ending like new research. We're actually destroying the path of decades worth of research by basically retaliating against Harvard not recruiting enough, I guess, Republicans.
It's destroying the fabric of American innovation, honestly, because, by the way, most, pharma drugs and everything, they come from a lot of R&D from NIH-funded basic research or population public health research. And then we discover, maybe this could lead to something. And then, of course, the American taxpayers who paid for these grants never actually get a penny, see a penny of these actual big pharma acquisitions and whatnot. So it's the research apparatus. If you kill that off, it kills off America's leadership. Because honestly, the greatest invention I will actually agree that there is a lot of waste in government, but the greatest innovation in American government is the funding and the creation of the NIH and how it spreads out the money across universities across America. And a lot of these tech corridors, like sometimes people think of tech like MIT. Obviously, MIT and Harvard has contributed greatly to like the burgeoning tech boom there, or many other universities like Stanford for Silicon Valley. But you're also talking about Alabama, Mississippi, Minnesota. There's so many good research across America that's being supported by NIH grants that it's not just DC swamp money. It's literally money that is going to all these different places and being the cornerstone. These universities are like the innovation hub of each of these rural states, right? They otherwise don't have many other major tech industries, but these are the research hub. And they're being killed off because most of the research in the universities, not the teaching, because teaching is important for our next generation, but for actual R&D, the tech hub innovation corridor, they're created by the universities and funded by NIH, National Science Foundation, and they're being gutted. And National Science Foundation is being gutted alongside NIH. So it's very sad time in American innovation right now.
How does the Trump administration reconcile we want to make America healthy again with RFK, but then we're also going to cut health research? Like, it seems backwards.
It is so backwards. It's just complete opposite of what you want to do. If you want to make America healthy again, there's more than just rolling back stupid regulations. Like, again, rolling back regulations on PFAS is not going to make America healthy again, trust me. Fine, food dyes maybe, but that's just a tip of the iceberg. Most of the research to actually find cures and everything, by the way, they talk about we need placebo controlled trials. Yes, generally we need that, but to do these trials, You need universities. They don't just, you can't do them at your local Walmart supercenter. Like, you need an actual university academic. There's an engine behind it that runs it. And most lay public have no idea how the engine of research works, the protocols, the reviews, the research administration, the apparatus to do this. Some of these research engines, they cost like, $5-10 million a year to run just one study. It's not waste. It's actually going to all these staffers that run these like 250,000 person studies to keep it going, and all these other research that goes beyond that, and these laboratory studies. If you kill it off, you're not going to see immediate kind of things. It's not like defunding Social Security, which a lot of people are getting really pissed off. Seniors, how am I going to get my Social Security, right? Update all this information. But you won't see it. But it's like long COVID. You won't immediately see it. But the lasting harm and damage to American society is huge. And a lot of these researchers, they're not all of them are American, but they come to America to do these research. Some of these universities, the most international, they're not going to come here anymore. We're not going to get the best and brightest. These genius visas, Einstein visas that supposedly Melania took advantage of years ago. They're actually the main visa that allows, say, foreign researchers to come to America and stay in America and become green card holders and U.S. citizens and taxpayers and become, for example, the Nobel Prize winner, who invented the mRNA technology for a lot of this stuff, which, by the way, we're using for cancer, not just for COVID vaccines. Originally the company's BioNTech was for cancer research, as a delivery instrument to prevent cancer. That was all, they're foreigners. They come to the country and they find they're amazing researchers. We attract the best and the brightest, and they become American innovations. We attract them over, they become American. They contribute to the American economy and American greatness and American innovation. And now we're just poof.
Yeah.
We kick them out.
You mentioned, you brought up mRNA there. My understanding, and also criticize me on this or what I might be missing here, but my understanding was one of the reasons people would get myocarditis from these mRNA injections wasn't necessarily because of the mRNA, but it was rather because of the application by nurses of how they were injecting without maybe aspirating to make sure that they weren't injecting directly into a vein, essentially pulling back a little bit to check if there's blood in the line before injecting, and then essentially driving a mega dose of a vaccine into somebody's heart, leading to potential, scarring or myocarditis.
No, so first of all, not all vaccines are created like. A lot of the clots came from the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, which were none of those were
not mRNA.
Right. So the clotting is a very different thing. And also for the vaccines, so when the main issue with the vaccines was, and the vaccine scientists that I speak to, well-recognized ones, they said the biggest mistake was that they gave the second shot too close to the first shot. They should have waited at least 2 months, if not 3, 4, 5 months or 6 months before the second shot. Because when you have it within 3 weeks or 4 weeks from Moderna, 3 weeks for Pfizer, it was almost like too much of a reaction. It created you got an initial reaction and you got a second dose and your body went into hyper mode. Like, oh my God, I just saw it again. Oh my God, I need to and that created a lot of the myocarditis, pericarditis. But when we saw on boosters, because the third shot boosters and fourth shot and other kind of updated vaccines, all of them basically disappeared. If you look at basically beyond the second shot, the distant third shots, distant fourth shots, which are separated by over a year usually, right? You never saw any. Basically, all these pericarditis, myocarditis completely disappeared. So you didn't see it with the first shot. You saw it with the second shot, and you didn't see it with any subsequent shots. It was because the second shot was too close in time. And this is personal, direct interaction with vaccine scientists who and they said that was their biggest mistake. But so in the future, they'll learn that I think we should separate it out by 2, 3, 4 months for the second shot. But that's why we don't see any of this anymore with boosters, because they're like way beyond any recent, 3-week for a second dose kind of thing.
Yeah. Briefly, I want to touch a couple more questions here. One of the last, second to last one here I want to hit on is this rollback from the EPA on these forever chemicals. Obviously, I feel like this is driven more by lobbyists than like RFK. Like, I don't know that RFK wants to go in there and say, we want to roll back these forever chemicals. But now, forever chemicals linked to heart disease, higher cholesterol, cancers, or whatever. Yeah, the EPA is giving utility companies more, years more worth of compliance to essentially, regulate the water, which I don't know why we would roll back regulations like that. I feel like these are very clearly bad chemicals, but now we're loosening regulations on them. Still haven't figured out why they would do that. But do you think RFK, moving past the forever chemicals and red dyes, do you think he can actually get America healthy again? Or is it a nice campaign thing and he's always going to be limited by, lobbyists?
It's a vaporware, because like RFK, he's not a good manager. He doesn't know. This is where I say we need leadership that can know what the turd that's in a box that a lobbyist tries to pass on your table. You need to know how to sniff out a turd box. It's kind of like, there's plenty of investments which are shit, right? But you as a good investor needs to know that's junk, that's trite, that's overdone. This is clearly some fraud, right? And so with policy is the same way. You need to be a good manager and have good leadership and be able to know be motivated to investigate what the hell are in these kind of proposals to deregulate, to put through these new guidelines, or these guidelines that gets massaged by industry and watered down so much that it becomes almost nonsensical. Some of these dietary guidelines that we put out years ago, every time the scientific committee puts it out, but that's not the final report. By the time it goes through something called federal review, go look it up. Federal review of these guidelines, man, they get so watered down by the time it actually comes out. It's like a shadow of its former self. And it's due to lobbyists who it goes to all these different congressional committees, different agencies. And oftentimes lobbying influence is so powerful that it doesn't even, the science is not even, sometimes it's like a direct contradiction. It's like, no, I didn't say that. How did that end up there, right? It's not a scientific problem. That's actually part of the reason where, like, I kind of gave up on research many years ago. Like, I used to be a researcher with like hundreds of papers and one of the top cited in the world. But I just gave it up because I realized you could do the best research in this world, but at the end of the day, you're peeing into the wind unless you actually have policymakers who know what they're doing and actually know how to implement them. And RFK Jr. does not know how to do that. He just basically he has a few hand-waving things to his base, but he doesn't actually implement. If he truly did, why the hell would he axe so much of the CDC, right? He canceled so many of why are we canceling a relationship with WHO? Maybe that's above RFK, that's at the Trump level. But all these kind of things where we're defunding the Agency of Healthcare Quality Research that actually puts out a lot of these guidelines, that's actually being destroyed. The pandemic office is being closed down or merged with another office. Like, we're wholesale axing our health agency, like 20%, I think. We're talking about like tens of thousands of people who actually have institutional knowledge of these public health programs gone. If he wants to actually, on a more basic level, like, why did he terminate the suicide prevention lines, right? Because if you want to make people healthy and reduce suicide rates, why are we cutting these suicide off, substance abuse lines and offices? It makes no sense. It's just a radical, Doge style cuts without any kind of like brains about this. And of course, cutting NIH and National Science Foundation and all these kind of things. What the hell is he doing, right? Because that literally was America had an unfair advantage against the rest of the world because we had the biggest funding mechanism and innovation engine for for sourcing around the country in a decentralized way. It's amazing innovations, and they're all destroyed. Basically, NIH is just a shadow of its former self. Same with National Science Foundation. Honestly, it is bad. It is, and I think he doesn't understand. If you want to make America healthy, you fund research. You increase research funding. Maybe you can be much more precise in demands, in requirements, but you increase research funding, not cut it, and you don't roll back regulations. Actually, save people's lives. Like the EPA rolling back PFAS. PFAS is like, everyone recognizes PFAS is bad. So many companies have settled PFAS lawsuits so quickly that they know it's a losing case if they keep fighting any lawsuits against them over PFAS.
Right.
By the way,
right.
everyone should watch the movie Dark Waters. It's a good like movie condensed narrative of what happened with PFAS saga, of how people in Petersburg, West Virginia, got poisoned by the DuPont factory for PFAS. And by the way, they haven't really solved it. They just changed a different chemical that's not PFAS, but it's still bad. And again, we don't have good research on that because we're now using a PFAS substitute in these DuPont factories. And these substitutes, guess what? Because we have all this PFAS research, that we can prove that they're bad, but we don't have research on these newer chemicals. And now it's kind of like litigation has to start this 20, 30-year cycle again to prove it, that how bad it is, right? And in the end, by the way, in the Dark Waters movie, the Petersburg, West Virginia case, the lawyer was only able to, the plaintiff, by the way, died before they got a resolution, a case, but they were only able to win because they actually had to do a long-term study for like 5 to 10 years to prove that the blood levels of PFAS in these residents actually led them to higher rates of all these different diseases, cancers, and conditions. Only by then, with the research for that, can they actually win the case. And that's why the original plaintiff, the farmer, actually died. But now we have to start all over again when they switch to a different chemical. Deregulation allows them to do that. And we don't have the research apparatus and engine in West Virginia and all these different places to do these research anymore. So industry wins, and
a good point.
The public health suffers.
So the last question that I have for you is it has to do with Elon Musk's pronouns. His pronouns apparently are prosecute Fauci. What's your response to that?
I don't even know what the hell he's doing or talking about. Like I will recognize that he runs a good rocket company and a very decent car company. And, I'm actually not as anti-Tesla as some people are. Like, I recognize that, he is a good businessman that put these companies together. He's not a rocket scientist in every way, and especially for medical research kind of things. I remember Elon Musk saying, by April 2020, COVID will be down to nothing, right? He famously tweeted that. It's like, who the hell fed you that data? It's like, it's just like Joe Rogan. I think Joe Rogan, he's good on many things. He has Neil deGrasse Tyson on his show, but sometimes he's fed really shitty advice by people in their community, their tech bro community, the alpha male bro community. And most of them don't come from the world of science like I have, and don't understand the process of science and how all this data is processed, and how there is like junk science that people can publish out there all the time that doesn't mean anything, right? And even I think they're fundamentally like, they're rational people, but they're surrounded by this bubble where they're just feeding this stupid misinformation bubble. They're caught in a misinformation bubble. So, and now, of course, he gets political cycle, he's very political. And COVID was one of the things that got very, very politicized. And I think he just got, it's kind of like kids who in high school, are they inherently bad, or are there certain kids who just hang out with the wrong crowd, right? I think Elon Musk and Joe Rogan just hung out with the wrong crowd, feeding them this toxic nonsense. And same with a lot of my right-wing friends who like talks about seed oils. I'm like, no, I'm a nutrition scientist who studied this for years. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. It's just your eco bubble fed you that. And same with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. Like, it's just when you get polarized, that you ignore the fundamental sciences. And I've had to debate people who's like, there's tons of evidence that, vaccines cause autism. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? There's like literally dozens and dozens of studies that says vaccines don't cause autism. Actually, their studies actually show vaccination lowers your risk of autism. And for them to claim that it doesn't exist, like they're living on a different universe, different planet. And I feel like it's sometimes there are bad actors who are just lying out for trying to hawk merch and other kind of like for political reasons, push some propaganda. But then other people were just caught into it. And I think Musk and Joe Rogan were just caught into this stupid bubble early on in the pandemic.
What do you think about this whole measles thing? Because, RFK is now coming out saying, oh, only the very sick are dying. Why the hell is anybody dying from measles today? Like, I thought we get the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine as a child, and it's been very safe, the MMR. Why are people not taking this? And why are we in 2025 having a measles outbreak?
Remember earlier I said dead men tell no tales. That's one angle. The other in public health, but the other angle is that people who have never seen a disease, and this is what happens with measles, people who've never seen a disease don't remember how bad it is. So it's kind of like in public health, let's just say there's an intersection in which a lot of people got killed. You put a crosswalk, and instead of people getting killed and getting sent to the ER at this crosswalk, they put a sky bridge or crossing signal or some tunnel. Nobody gets killed or gets sent to the hospital at this intersection. And within like 10, 20, 30 years, people forgot how dangerous this intersection was before the advent of this crosswalk and sky bridge or tunnel that allowed people to not get killed. And we're in this situation where we are so far from a society where polio and measles was like literally a living thing that actually brought people down, this horrible, horrible pathogen. Mitch McConnell, he was almost paralyzed as a kid by polio. That's why Mitch McConnell is famously, he's right-wing on many things, but he is very pro-vaccine because he survived that. But most of that generation are like octogenarians or older, right? And people today just forgot about it. And so now it's very easy to like delude a lot of the people, again, about these vaccine autism thing, because it's like people don't want to break also in their bubble. They're not experts. They don't want to like debate efficacy of measles with all of their other people in the same bubble. It's kind of like ivermectin, like, do you really want to start an argument? If you really don't know much about this, you're not going to argue. And then so this perpetuates this bubble kind of thing. And I think right now with the measles, misinformation, disinformation, measles is kind of like, seed oil. It's kind of like ivermectin. I don't know what the hell these people are living. They're on a different planet, but they're listening to their certain favorite podcasts that only feed them certain information. And I feel it's very worrisome.
Well, I think that's unfortunately, it's very difficult to, in social media, have any sort of critical analysis of anything unless it feeds into one narrative. Because then all of a sudden if you say something that's against the mainstream narrative of the right or against the mainstream narrative of the left, you are now homeless, right? You're not. Whoever you're talking against, you don't have a home.
That's actually my problem sometimes. I criticize Biden's health issues at the beginning of doctors. And then, obviously I also criticize right-wing, bubble system. And sometimes I'm like, people, I'm damned if I do criticize, but society's damned if I don't. And it's like one of those things where like I'm stuck in the middle where, people sometimes want to hear their tribe message more than the actual truth, right?
Correct.
Like I want to call balls and strikes, but everyone wants you to be like a coach or like a cheerleader of their side. And if I tell people, look, Teslas, yes, they catch fire, but so do gasoline engines. Gasoline engines catch on fire way more than Teslas. So Teslas catching fire is not a thing, and Teslas do have much lower accident rates than non autopilot cars. And yes, occasionally they get accidents, but the accident rates of regular manual cars are way higher. But if I say this on the left, I'm like somehow warped and brainwashed by Elon, which doesn't even make sense.
I have to say, I'm really disappointed sort of with just sort of like what's happened to the Democratic Party, because like it's like a leadership environment on that side for Americans. Americans don't really have a leader in the Dem Party right now. You know, you don't have the Obama figure running the Dem Party. And Trump is such a powerful uniter of the right that you have no match on the left right now. And I don't know, you know, they need, if Trump's going to go for his third term, I say they got to bring Obama back.
Yeah, they do. I always tell people, always on the left say, we need a Joe Rogan. We need our own Joe Rogan. I always tell people, you know, the left had a Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. He endorsed Bernie. You know, he is pro-unions, you know, people unionizing. Like he was actually for he was for same-sex marriage and a lot of LGBT issues for the longest time. Like, it's just that, you know, over time he obviously drifted, but I think the left does have a lack of leadership, but I think it's not like they can't find it. It's just right now they're in this recovery phase of trying to figure themselves out.
Right. I mean, and I don't know that AOC is going to be there to bail us out.
Look, I think AOC has really good policies, and I really admire her in many ways. And in certain ways, you can't say she's conflicted, right? She literally has one of the lowest net worths in Congress. She doesn't trade like Marjorie Taylor Greene trades, right? And like, I don't think she has like that many conflicts. I think she's doing the best she can because she believes something. And same way, I may disagree with Tom Massey, but I think Tom Massey on the right is pretty principled of that he doesn't believe in this, and he's not going to fall for some lobbyist nonsense, right? So we can disagree on many things, but I think she's at the core. You can disagree about many other things, but I think she's very principled in what she believes in fighting for, the plight of the common man, right? Fighting for, affordable health care and all these worker injustice and other labor rights. And, I think her heart is in the right place. Her approach is different than the right, of course, but, Tom Massey, his heart is in the right place, even though his approach is different. And I think I respect people who have principles, who are not like influenced by lobbyists. They want to do the right thing, even if their approach is a little different. But because if your goal is to fight for society, for public health, and not just the rich, and not just for corporations, I think that's one of the most core principles that you need to look for in elected leaders, and not just be talking propaganda machines of some or just trying to milk their campaign donations for their own personal reasons. So I think we can come together. I believe we can come together. There are good people on the left and good people on the right who, as long as they fight for the common good, I hope Joe Rogan can come back and be that guy who fights for a lot of these progressive issues for the working poor. I think he can be that guy again and stay away from all these people feeding him like ivermectin and seed oil shit.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. How can people follow you on social?
You can follow me on Twitter, Dr. Eric Ding, Blue Sky. I actually have a much larger 5 million person following on Facebook that I don't use anymore. They can keep my powder dry for. There are certain things in which we can't fight everything. Right now, there's so much shit happening in Washington D.C. that I'm trying to. It's kind of like when you want to warn someone, like pull the alarm bells. You can't pull it every time, right? I want to pull it at certain times that I feel people really need to know, because there's a lot of things where you can criticize Trump about, And I think speaking up is very important. But at the same time, I want to really get people, whenever there is something that they can do about it, right? I'm trying to keep that powder dry. But I very much applaud people right now who are speaking up and standing up to Trump. And I am standing up a lot of these horrible policies. But I think whenever we can get people behind something that's really important, I think that's sometimes when your alarm will ring even louder, right? So I think that's where I have a personal.
I mean, I think that's a good analogy even in the stock market. Like if you're like you're Michael Burry and you say sell, come on, man, you've been saying sell every damn month since The Big Short, right? Like, okay, you hit it big that one time, but let's be real. If things are gonna be bullish, let's adapt here. So I think you're right to say like, hey, you can't be one direction all the time, because then what's the point of listening? But I think then the flip side of that is sometimes people like, oh, Kevin's changed his opinion again. I go, yeah, well, when the data changes, I change my mind. So.
I know, and I respect that. I actually look at people who, do they actually change when the data clearly has shifted, or like the market condition has shifted? If they're still like on that one end, I'm like, they're just always, that's not a good signal person that I want to listen to. So I really much respect that. So whenever I'm going to go big on Bitcoin, I'll let you know, all right?
That's awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. Follow Dr. Eric Ding on social. Thank you so much for your perspectives. I mean, we covered a lot here from cancer and Biden to nutrition, and I look forward to having a conversation again in the future. So really appreciate your time. And anything else you want to say as we cut out here?
No, I think people should just keep an open mind. I think there's a lot of turbulent things ahead, and don't get caught into your bubble. Just think, what truly matters, and how can we fight for, everyday people. I think that's what really matters, and look for people who will change their ideas and minds whenever the information comes out. I think those are the best signal people to follow. So thank you so much for what you do, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Love it.